Hello all. It is so good to see you all, and then it's almost 9:10 now, and I see this enthusiasm staying through, and then I see this great lineup of speakers you have, leaders and so many variety of things that you have got. Amazing. I love BITS, and then the last 2 weeks I've been like on a BITS Pilani tour. I was at BITS Pilani, the Pilani campus about 2 weeks ago, and 2 days from now I'm going to be in BITS Hyderabad. So probably I'm going to have an answer on which among the three BITS I like the most. So that all depends on how you guys respond to today. Okay, I'll try to keep my talk shorter and then the interaction longer, because I hear that there is going to be a cultural performance after this. I don't want you guys to be waiting for that, so I'll keep my talk shorter than what I originally planned. No issues. You won't miss much. So the idea is truly to take heart from your tagline this year, shifting paradigms. So a lot of times, when we have these taglines for TechFest and all those things, people don't even remember what those taglines are, and especially after 2 months, what did we keep, and then few months later you will forget that, and then go on to settle for some investment banking job or some management consultant job, or going on to work in some software coding job and all those things. So what paradigm you are shifting. So by that time, you'd have forgotten about that. So one thing, truly we have to take from this tagline is how you can shift paradigms in your industry, and how we can shift across India, because there are a whole range of problems that we see around. And a while ago, I was interacting with chemical engineering students in IIT Guwahati. And almost every chemical engineering student who came to me were looking at how do I get a job in machine learning, and how can I do a software development better and so on. So not one chemical engineer there was asking about how I can better chemical engineering. And they were asking about what problems are there in chemical engineering. And that just blew my mind, what problems are there? There are so many problems in chemical engineering that is so important to humanity that to solve. Like for instance, battery technology. That is, we are so far away from, having great battery technologies, especially as solar is going to take over the world. It's an extreme big problem in places like Germany on how, you can store the energy, and how you can, manage the grid. That's such an important problem, and they told me that there is no big problem in chemical engineering to solve. And then things like, how are we going to manage all this plastic that we are throwing around? What ways can we do that? That's a huge problem for humanity, and that is again a chemical engineering problem. So there's I gave them about 7 problem statements after that. And so, are any of you guys who are going to work in that? Okay, then finally they said, okay, how is this going to pay us? So ultimately, you guys are all, very smart guys, because you got in here because you are smart. You got in here because you had the energy to push through all those, competitive exams and so on. But by the time you get out of here, most of you become zombies. You go into, these fields that you really hate. When you probably, hear the job description of some of these top high-paying jobs, it sucks, but you're going to be ending up doing this Excel sheets and looking at these income statements, and trying to find out which two companies are better, or should we do this thing or not. It's just you're going to spend a lot of time in monotonous Excel sheets, or with bug bases, and then looking at the but as an engineer, think through this engineering mindset. The engineering mindset is, how can I solve some of the really complex problems? Like in India, we have the DNA in us, our Indus Valley civilization. There's some of the great problems. Like if you go and look at the the ruins of Indus Valley civilization, we don't find things like pyramids. We don't find things like this Hammurabi's wall of Hammurabi's law code and so on. What we instead find are drainage systems, things to store grains, and things to relax. So the kind of priorities, they got it really, really right. They were able to innovate. They were able to produce that kind of innovative culture. Same thing with during our Guptas, and so on. So, but then by the last 200 years, we have lost all that, and then so pretty much we are looking at how we can do something cheaper for some other country. For some other company. So we want to look at some of these big ideas that we are that we have to take up. And again, at my company Invento, again we are like trying to like solve the problem. Like how are we going to take up this? So this next in line, it's going to be robotics. And by the time most of you graduate, there are going to be robots in your offices. So that's going to be the reality. It's happening at such a rapid rate, and it's just mind-blowingly crazy. But the kind of things that we are taught in our college programs are way behind that, and we are still not thinking through the process, because so we are still looking at the end carriers. We are not looking at the processes that you are going to be taking to solve those complex problems. So we are in that mindset where we will study something and then plan to use it for a few years, and then go on to do something else. So the rate of technological progress is happening at such a pace that you cannot easily keep up with the content. Rather, you have to be strong in your engineering process, because all of those involve solving some of the similar problems. So use this time, this year, these 4 years of your time, primarily on this learning the real engineering. The real engineers, what they do is they try to make something practical. That's all is to engineering. So scientists do not have to care about the problem of practicality, because as the famous quote goes, in theory there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice there is. So we are about the practice. So it's all about how do we optimize something. So that's something like throughout your engineering goal. So you have to look at how do we optimize something, how do we do something better, because if you're constantly going to push like in the pursuit of getting better, you are going to be shifting paradigms. And as Mr. Vaidishwaran showed at the last, like they were quoting Peter Thiel. So look at problems, unstated problems, because the stated problems are solved by a lot of people. The unstated problems are the ones that are not being looked at by enough people, because those problems are not being properly defined. So go after these big unstated problems. There are like thousands of it around us. So we kind of know the side effects of those problems, but we don't actually realize those problems. We kind of take it for granted. So for instance, in our education system itself, that led us to this problem. That we know kind of it is broken, so we know the side effects of it, but we still do not know all the problem statements. We don't clearly define those problem statements, because once we start defining those problem statements, we can start solving them. So those are the kind of unstated problems that you guys have to think through to shift paradigms. So sort of like I used like shifting paradigms like 20 times. So this making sure the organizers got enough content as a sort of this promotional material. So because this is like first day, right? Like you have to say something about the tagline, but there's something I truly believe. Some of this big ideas that you guys are going to be taking in almost any engineering field. So we hire engineers from all kind of branches to push them through this through the edges. So looking at like new material composites for our bots, looking at new algorithms, looking at new ways to deliver power and so on. So constantly push through. There are like ideas in solar energy. How do we better tap solar energy? So it's no longer just a problem of installing photovoltaic cells, but how do we find the real estate to deploy that, and how do we have that right kind of efficiency? So here the problem statements become much more complex. So can we put them over canals? So that's again that approach that was tried in Gujarat. So that kind of solved a lot of problems in solar energy, because now it keeps the whole solar cells cooler, increase the efficiency, decrease the water evaporation that was happening, and then most importantly, it did away with the real estate cost. That was a big problem that was happening in solar energy. So right now solar energy, either you put it at something like a remote forsaken place, then the problem of maintenance and then connecting to the grid and all those things come, or you put it in the cities, then the problem of real estate comes, like where do you put it? So that's sort of so solve part of the problem. But now we have to push forward, like how can we more effectively utilize the real estate that we have around us to tap in the energy. So those are the kind of problems you have to start looking at, start changing if you are like, in things like chemical engineering or materials and so on. So start looking at those important problems. So you are not just born to do an Excel sheet. So do something really really important. Sorry, was I too pessimistic? Like you guys have become entirely silent. So what I will do is like let us have a more interactive session. So you guys ask me questions. So you guys ask me questions. So let us go with that. So there's always the problem in any college I see, like the first person asking the question is the one who's like taking the longest. So the question is, what are the biggest problems in finance industry right now? So the biggest problem I would say is financial inclusion. So how many people are using a bank account every day? So a person who's using a bank account at least once a week is included in the financial system. What percentage of them are included? So that's the biggest problem in the financial industry. So look at that. Like, so financial inclusion into the overall system. So most of them are disconnected from the ability to borrow and the ability to save. So we have to bring them into that. So that inclusion is the first big problem. And then as in Indian context, the biggest problem is our equity markets, the stock markets are completely opaque and not prone to data. So there is like in the past we have developed fintech tools. And still the investors would come to us and ask, like, do you know of particular tips and insights? So they are not looking at data. They just want some some way to get the insider information. So this insider information is rampant in Indian equity markets. How can we have better algorithms and better technology to find out those insider trading trading? And then so SEBI needs those better algorithms to find those patterns of insider trading that is quite rampant. Because unless the insider trading is put down, the equity markets will never be truly be something that is trustworthy, something that will include a lot. It will just be still Bombay Club. So that is something very important, like building algorithms to better bring transparency to the equity markets. And then overall, like again, like our bond markets are very, very small relative to the size of the world bond markets. Again, that has to be improved. So whole range of issues in the financial market. So how did I get an idea of starting to write answers on Quora? Nothing much actually. So I've been a writer for a long time. So I've written a lot of it. Like I've been an early blogger and so on. And then just before coming to Quora, I was actually consulting a major party in the US. Their content strategy I was partly managing. So I was developing content, and so I was a professional writer for a while. So I tried out multiple things in my life. One of the things that I tried before Quora was like developing the content strategy for Republican Party, and then part of it also did for some of the major corporations I did. Then I thought like writing is too important to be like done professionally, so I did it, got onto Quora.
Is it on? Hello? Hello, sir. Excuse me, sir, this side.
Okay.
Sir, I want to ask you a question, like how, like your answers are pretty well balanced. Neither they are to the very extreme right or to the extreme left. So how you maintain that balance?
Somewhat on the right though. I think that's what.
Sir, now it has become right. I agree with your point.
Little, I was
After
always
2014,
actually
I guess.
I was always on the right a little bit. So I like the word right. It means a lot of positive things, right? Like doing the right thing, and then so I always leaned a bit on the right. That didn't happen now. Actually, that was always there. but I actually like once you keep an open mind, you can see a different perspectives. So you don't need to be completely unbiased after the thing. So there has to be a thing like about bias. We always talk about bias. So bias, a priori bias is bad. So before you even go into something, if you have bias about it, that's sort of bad thing, because you're not opening your eyes to facts. But after the looking at the facts, if you are biased, that's okay. Like after looking at Trump, whether he is good or bad, if you have an opinion, that is fine. That kind of bias is fine. So after looking at the facts, if you are having bias and saying he's a fool, then I think that should be fine thing. So bias is something that is a natural thing for us, because that's a part of decision making. If you don't like make decisions at all, then we will be unbiased. To simplify it, like be unbiased when you are taking in the facts, but after you take in the facts, be biased, because that's the part of making decisions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just a follow up. So you said you are a little bit towards right. So do you think right is right?
So what would I say? So I don't want to be left out, so I'm right.
Excuse me? Yeah, our country has several problems in our social and political spheres. Like, for example, our labor force is largely not very technically good and very inefficient. And our political spheres, also, what kind of a mess is there in our political arena. So where should one start to sort out most of our political and social problems?
As an individual,
As an individual or as a group? Like,
as an individual, like looking at more of the micro thing makes more sense. Like as the more you look at macro is a very fascinating aspect, both in political and the economic things, but it's also something that you cannot do much to the macro. So only by impacting the micro, we actually change the macro. So we can do part of it in the political thing. So like tomorrow morning, just go and vote. So that if you guys if you guys are from here. But more so, like our state political systems are some of the most corrupted ones. So central wise, like throughout since 1947, we have been having fairly good leaders in the central government. Now the kind of accusation about our prime ministers are very, very small. Like Indira Gandhi had a podium that was 2 centimeters higher, and that kind of accusations. But the biggest problem are in our state governments. The state governments, are majority of them are goons, ruffians, corrupt, and all kind of rogues that are there in our state systems. The problem is that the central government cannot impact the core things in your life. Central government controls things like foreign policy or things like defense that do not affect you daily. The state government is the one that is doing things that are affecting you. Lot of the water policy is done by the state government. The basic primary education is controlled by the state government. Land policy, where most of the corruption exists, that is controlled by the state government. So lot of things that affect the poor, like agriculture, water, education, sanitation, and all lot of these are much more controlled by the state government, and law and order, most important. These are all controlled by the state government. So the ones that touch the poor are in the state subjects. The ones that touch the middle and the rich, they are more in the central subject. So that's why the government college, government institute of technologies, they are great. But then the government schools, they are poor, because central and state. So we have gone into a point where the middle class does not have to worry that much about the state governments at all, because a lot of our things are managed by the central government. It is the poor who have to stick with the state governments with their poor schools, poor hospitals, and so on. But then we don't care about the state politics as much as we should, as much as we concern about the central politics. So in states where they care a lot about the state politics, those states also do well. The states where the state government is sort of remote controlled by somewhere, so those states do not do well. So fundamentally, to fix the India's political system, we have to start taking our state governments much more seriously and start having state chief ministers as good as our prime ministers. If we have that itself will be a huge in our system. So that is one. And then the first question was like, how do we improve the labor force participation and labor force overall skills of this thing. First is we need to have good jobs, not just in technology, but outside. So we need to have good manufacturing revolution. So until that comes, our labor will not have enough chances to actually get good jobs. So right now we have agriculture where we have very small farmlands, and then on the other side we have this, the jobs in Google and Facebook. There is not much in between. We need to create enough in-between jobs, and that will come with manufacturing. So we need to really go for the manufacturing revolution, to doing really things in India, and that we have to innovate in India. We cannot just try to find out some technology that the Americans no longer care about and try to do it here. We have to do something innovate truly from India, manufacture in India, and that's what Germans did. Truly build something so that where you'll have really high margins, you can really engage your smart talented pool. Then the engineers will have great jobs, not just in coding software, but also in other things, because those manufacturing is where can hire the top engineers. So manufacturing revolution is still something that our leaders talk about a lot, but they don't really do much to solve it. So if you are an engineer, again look at what all ways in which you can create manufacturing in India, create next gen factories in India. So that again you can start changing.
Good evening, sir. Yeah, this side, sir.
So there is someone having a mic here.
Hello. Yeah, good evening, sir. Sir, according to you, among the three countries, India, US, and China, which one has the better political system and why?
I mean, looking at the Americans, I just only pity them. They used to have a good system. The last 4 or 5 years are completely screwed up. They had a good leader who was completely not allowed to operate at all. So there was huge amount of things. So I used to live in the US South also for a while. So I'm friends with both Republicans and Democrats. A lot of it I know, and I know political strategists and all those guys. So a lot of them, so some of them at least the intelligent ones, they bothered about it, but a lot of times people did not bother that the Obama government was stopped from doing anything. So their budgets were not allowed to be passed, and there was a time when the whole government was stopped in 2013. So that is again one end of this problem, and the other end of this problem is Trump, who knows completely nothing, and then got onto this thing. It's totally crazy. So only hope is that the US system continues to be so inefficient to stop Trump from doing much more stupid things. So the US system is not something something that is to be very very looked up, especially now. So the US had a lot of good things going because they had great leaders and so on at various points, but it's not the system itself that is actually helping them go. So now we see the real problems of the system. China, on the other hand, they don't have a plan for the next thing. So at some point, people are going to ask for the rights. At some point, today or 10 years from now, or 15 years from now, or 20 years from now, almost all dictatorial countries eventually transitioned to become democratic countries. Japan became a democratic country, South Korea became a democratic country, Germany became a democratic country, and so on. So all of them, they followed this Anglo-Saxon democratic system. So when will China do that is a big uncertainty, and what ways in which they will do that, because at some point people are going to ask for the rights, and how is that going to look like? No one has a clue, because there will be this big disruption when you're shifting the system from one thing to the another. That shift in the system will that slow China and all those things. Those are big questions that the geopolitical observers are looking at. So Chinese system again. So India's is not the perfect, but so our founding fathers spent a lot of time. If you look at the speeches during the Constituent Assembly, they didn't each of these things that you see, they didn't decide it on one fine day. Okay, let's have this thing. For over 2 years, they discussed threadbare They had hundreds of meetings. And for the first time in the world, they involved women in the process. So in other constitution process, it was all men writing it. Now our constitution was unique. We also involved women in the process. Our guys went after the people around the country. They got feedback from a variety of, so over 2 years they spent in building the system, an amazing system. So I would say, I mean, again, I am biased, but I would say like our system, it was far more well thought out than the other two, because other two did not have this much 2 years of time somebody had to think through that. Both of them came by accident, both the American and the Chinese. Ours was not by accident, it was through proper thought process.
Yeah, good evening, sir. This side, sir. So, sir, I have basically two questions for you. A lot of questions asked about Quora from you, so I hope this is the last one. So, sir, what do you prefer to be addressed as most followed writer on Quora or the founder of Invento?
Founder of Invento, any
Okay,
day.
so-
So I always tell them, so this is like something like I care more about what we do at Invento, like something that we can truly solve. Again, Quora I take seriously, I really like it a lot. I interact with students. So primarily, Quora is my, it's sort of like giving back to the student community and like, you know, interacting with the student community. And so that's what I see Quora as. But Invento is my, like, you know, primary, my mission.
Yeah, the second question would be, sir, India takes a lot of pride in the jugaad thing that is there. We take a lot of pride in calling ourselves fixers, but don't you think this country needs more innovators right now?
So innovation is not different from Jugaad. In fact, I had delivered a talk like few months ago in IT Bombay, and like Jugaad, we are taking it too lightly. You know, the things that go into Jugaad, so there have been many research papers on Jugaad, like, and places like China, they use this word Jugaad. And last year I was at the Maker Fair in Washington DC, and again people asked me about Jugaad. The problem is, like, people ask me about Jugaad and I don't know much about. As an Indian, we see Jugaad in like Facebook shares and then sometimes in other places, but we are, as a middle class Indian, we are not part of the Jugaad. So we, like, you know, it is the poor Indians who are actually, you know, building those innovative solutions. Without the benefit of theory, they are building some of these innovative solutions. So there have been a whole range of videos. So I was looking at a guy in Bihar. He was over 65 years old. He saw a problem. The problem was he had to go to his grandsons on the other side of the river almost every day. But then he needed a cycle. If he takes the boat, he would not be able to take a cycle, and his boat would not fit a cycle. So how would he have a cycle on the other side of the river was his main thing. So what he did was he created a cycle that goes like a boat. So that cycle can be run both on the water and on land. This guy has no engineering experience, nothing. He just saw a problem and went and solved it. That's so amazing. So what if these Jugaad guys are given the benefit of you? You guys have all the theory, you guys have the, like, you know, you can do the math, you can do the physics, you can do all those, and you can do the costing, you can do the spreadsheets and so on. What if these guys have the, like, you know, the theory? That's where, like, you know, India can truly do it. So Jugaad is there, but this Jugaad is hanging somewhere in the middle. The poor people are, like, you know, barely doing it, like, you know, trying to find solutions. But it is the middle class India and upper class India, of course, they don't care about anything. But it is the middle class India. We have to be, like, you know, helping those Jugaad guys in actually adding what we did with engineering. But then most of us do not take our engineering degrees that seriously. So we don't actually, like, you know, work with those Jugaad guys. Like, how many of you guys, like, work with entrepreneurs outside of your campus? Yeah, stand up. So how many of you guys, like, it could be pushcart vendors, it could be like, you know, shopkeepers, any kind of entrepreneurs, non-traditional entrepreneurs, not startups, non-traditional entrepreneurs. No, I don't want people to work with tech startups, I mean, but like non-traditional entrepreneurs, how many? 1, 2, 3. I mean, don't feel ashamed. This is a good thing. Okay, so far I have 3 out of, like, probably a few hundred people here. So three of us are, like, you know, using your engineering skills to, like, you know, actually help an entrepreneur outside. So, but more of you, like more than half of you should be doing that, because see, take your engineering degree very seriously. Because you guys are the smarter ones. Those guys are gonna need you. Like by the time you graduate, you guys will be flying off to somewhere. But while you are in these things, so India has this like potential. You like these our great institutes are spread all over the country. In all these I see these great institutes, and around it I see a a patch of poverty. Like whether it's BITS Pilani or IIT Guwahati or XLRE in Jharkhand and so on. So I see potential, because you guys have the potential to change the radius. You guys can change the processes, the way in which they do things. Once those poor shopkeepers and farmers and shop cart guys start changing, then they will like impact the next guy. So for Jugaad, it is you guys who can change it really.
Sir, sorry, the first one. Sir, in the recent years and even in the years before, so we have one of the most pressing issue in the world is global terrorism. Sir, whenever France was a victim twice, and so whenever this topic comes up, one line that always pops up is terror has no religion. Sir, and somewhere I believe it's true. Because, sir, I belong to the Northeast and I know for sure terror is not about religion. Sir, but some days ago, a group called Hindu Rajput Karni Sena did something, sir, they did so much as they slapped a director.
Yeah, I know the director was slapped for,
Sir,
yeah.
they slapped a director, and another director tweeted that
Anurag Kashyap.
this is Hindu terrorism and something like that. The same people defend the other communities when some other acts of much larger scale happens. They defend it by saying terror has no religion, but when someone else do something so much as slap a person, they say that this is terrorism, this is Hindu terrorism. Sir, what are your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a complex thing. So because one is, we have history challenged people like the tweeters and so on, there's a lot of them. And a lot of them are hypocrites and idiots too. So the ultimately terror has no religion is a right answer. Doesn't mean like whether it is Hinduism or Islam or Christianity. And in each of these religions there are bad people. And so scientists have there have been bad scientists who did experiments, unethical experiments on people in Germany and Japan. Does it mean the scientific community is a bad thing? No, it means Helsinki Declaration and so many things came on clinical trials and so on. Anybody who uses a very broad label is an idiot. So that applies to Anurag Kashyap too. So now the question of what happens in global terrorism. So see, the thing is what is happening in Syria and Turkey is not something new. It has been happening since the start of human civilization. That place does not have a proper geographical barrier to block people from outside coming in. So that place has always been a great place for merging ideas. It has also been a great place for creating trouble. So since the start of time, so there is this great war between the Mitanni kingdoms and the Hittite kingdoms. In fact, a lot of things we know about the Hindu religion and Vedas come from the war between Syria and Turkey, or Iraq and Turkey. So this Mitanni kingdom in Iraq and the Hittite kingdom from Hattusha in Turkey. So they both were fighting, and finally at the end of it, they created a treaty. The treaty was amazing in that they called up all the in the name of Mitra, in the name of Varuna, in the name of all those things. So they put up this beautiful tablet that is carbon dated and so on. So that's what we know more about Indian history. But to come back, that kind of wars has always been there. Alexander ran through the territory, and then the Persians and the Persians and the Greeks. And so I lose the thought of it, because Persians have been fighting with almost everyone in that region. So the fight between Persia and the Western power has been since the start of human history. They have been fighting with the Greeks, they have been fighting with the Romans, they have been fighting with the Russians, they have been fighting with the British, and now they are fighting with the Americans and so on. So that fight, it's reduced to a Shia-Sunni fight, but it is far, far older than even Shia-Sunni fight, because it is a fight between Persia and the Western power to take control of the West Asia. So that again, so it as a, because it's far, far older than any kind of modern religion that we have. So and why do the terrorists do that way? A part of it is because it's a asymmetric warfare. So when you have like two armies, one army is like 10,000 people and other army is 3 people, they are not going to fight head on. The army of 3 people, they are going to find ways in which they can use the strength. The strength is unpredictability. So the army of 3 will always use their unpredictability against the army of 10,000. That has always been true of human history. Like, Shivaji and others, they have also used as asymmetric warfare. So this asymmetric warfare has a new name. And with a whole range of new powerful weapons. But it has always been throughout history, we have been fighting in West Asia, and throughout history, we have been using asymmetric warfare, what is now called terrorism, in it. So it has been there. So again, like, why France was attacked, partly it is because of a reaction to France. Why French and Americans got first involved in that war. So it all goes back to, it's a very, very complicated problem. And the problem is in the West, they don't properly look at the problem in the broader sense. Religion is also partly involved, but then it's a far, far bigger thing. We actually overestimate the power of religion. Actually, religions are not that powerful. If religions were that powerful, the whole of West Asia would be like collaborating, cooperating, because most of them are of same religion. That's not true. Religions are somewhat powerful. It's the power of ethnicities that has the real power. And ethnicities again come from people's fight to keep their practices. That is again a fundamental part of who we are. That again comes from there. When the practices are disabled or threatened, people will start fighting. So that's why the ethnic clashes and all those things happen. So it's all about ethnicities, less about religion. But people do not pay that much attention to that. So the global terrorism that is happening in West Asia, something both quite old and something that is always the Western powers had in hand, whether it is the Alexander's armies or later the Romans, all of them, they had a hand in that. And like the solving that we have to do, think of viable countries. So in the West Asia, most of the countries do not have a viable border. So a viable border is a very important for a country. For instance, think of India. There is this Indus River, there is this Indian Ocean, there is this Himalayas, a viable country. Or take China. On one end, the South China Sea, on the other top is the Siberia, on the left is the roof of the world. So again, like a more stable country. Whereas think of West Asia, what mountain ranges, what kind of natural barriers do they have? That's fundamental problem. Same thing happened in northern plains of Europe. That's why Germans and French have been fighting for so long, for like over 1,300 years they have been fighting, for the French and Germans. That's again they don't have proper borders. So it's part of it is just geographical thing for so the Middle Easterners, they are like stuck with bad geography. So the question was, so to improve the quality of politics in the country, should we have like an exam kind of system? So let's say we have an exam kind of system for our state politics. So the state politicians will think of how can they graduate to the central politics, and the central politicians will think how can I go to the UN. So like what is happening with our education itself, we are never satisfied with solving the problem of our region. We are always looking to go outside. So if we had exams like that, like we will have a lot of them ending up at the UN. A lot of those people who write those exams and graduate in the exams. See, in general, we are taking our exams too seriously. So this is for like, especially when you guys are going to apply to your master's programs, whether it's PhD or MS or MBA, you're going to find the like cold hard reality. It's not always about the marks. It's your GRE, GMAT marks are important, but they are not as important as you believe it is. Because in the rest of the world, this marks and this thing is not taken that seriously. Those exams are not that taken that seriously. Your whole broader thing is looked at, your statement of purpose, what you have done, your recommendations, and so on. So that all defines who you are, not these exams. So as India, as a country, one of the things we have to get out of is the exam mindset. Exams are like, it's a very small part of our life. And they cannot discover a lot about you in 3 hours. That's the most important thing. So exams cannot do anything quite important. So we have to get out of this mindset that exams can create a smart people or find smart people and all those. And politics require people who can really think on their foot and really solve some of the important problems. And those are the people actually who will be filtered out by the exams. So if you have an exams, if you really want to have an exam, take the people who failed in that exam and then give them the role in politics, because those are the people who could really actually solve the problem. The people who actually pass in that exams are the ones who you should not give the seats to.